All right, hi everyone, I'm Mike Gisondi. I'm the Vice Chair of Education at Stanford. It's really a pleasure to be here and I'm very grateful for the invitation to speak today. I was assigned the topic of Educator Toolbox and I had to really struggle with what would be included in this talk. You could go in 100 different directions like Christine just did, tons of information. And I thought that I would, how do I advance this? I have no disclosures. I thought that I would cover three topics: training, publishing, and thriving. I think these are all very important to a longitudinal career in medical education. I will explain why. So first we're going to talk about training. The difference between clinical teachers and medical educators was just kind of reviewed. A good clinical teacher is that great bedside teacher that we all know, the pit doc that all the residents love. They always win the teaching awards. They're really great at giving the residents autonomy and feedback. They do the day-to-day teaching, right? But with rigorous training, you can make a transformation to a medical educator. And medical educators have skill sets that are different than the regular clinician teacher. They can assess curricula, they can create curricula, they can assume administrative and research roles. They can do different things because of their training. Sadly, a lot of the really good bedside teachers get promoted into these administrative roles without training, and then they really kind of suffer in those roles, and programs don't advance. You can think about all the APDs that get promoted without any training, and all of a sudden they need to create curriculum, they don't know how to do it. So training is very important. And rigorous training is very important. It is a shame that we're, in the House of Medicine, medical educators still considered not rigorous in our approach to scholarship, right? Our clinician, our researchers, clinical researchers and basic science researchers certainly have rigorous methods, but so do medical education researchers, but only done so with training. So what's an example of not rigorous work? So not rigorous work is when a junior faculty member creates an interesting curriculum without doing any kind of literature search to know if it's ever been done before or if it's been done better. The residents kind of like it, and they maybe have a survey about it, and they publish it. So where they try to publish it, and they suffer trying to publish it because no one will take it. Right? It lacks the rigor of good research, essentially. And we need training to get beyond that learner satisfaction level in Kirkpatrick, and we need to be able to assess learning, and assessment and learning does come with training. I keep saying it over and over. So where to get the training? If you're a resident in the room, I encourage you to look at medical education fellowships. There's over 40 of them now. They just keep growing. The number keeps growing. They're broken down by SAEM into education fellowships and medical education scholarship fellowships that are SAEM approved. It's like an accreditation process. And the difference is the scholarship fellowships expect scholarship. They expect that you'll publish 2 papers during your fellowship to get the certificate from SAEM. All of these fellowships come in a bunch of varieties. There's 1 year, there's 2 year, you get a master's degree, you don't get a master's degree, you have to do research, you don't have to do research. So you can find the one that fits for you. There's a lot of variety to choose from. For the junior faculty in the room, you might consider getting a graduate degree. And this is done at great opportunity cost. If you think about all the combined degrees in medical school, there's MD, MBA, MD, MS. They get those trainings done early for their niche area. Medical education, there's no MD, MED. That doesn't exist in the country. So folks who pursue these medical education degrees, either a master's in medical education or a master's in health professions education, they do so at opportunity cost. It's usually when they're a faculty member, and it's time away from family, and it's money in an early junior faculty salary. So there's over 140 of these across the country. Most of them are programs where you have to be on site all of the time. So not all 140 are open to you unless you're going to move around the country to take those. But probably you're going to want to do one at your own institution, or you might choose to do one online. So I'm going to give you a couple tools in the toolbox, and these are going to be recommendations of what I think are really good master's degrees in the country. So there's 3 online programs that I recommend highly. The Johns Hopkins Masters, there's 2 tracks, and the research track is quite rigorous, and you'll walk out with excellent research methodology from that fellowship. The University of Cincinnati program is really tough. There's a ton of credit hours that you have to complete, but it's very comprehensive. And then the Michigan program is very interesting. It's competency-based. So there's, I don't know, 12 or 14 competencies, and you show that you're competent by bringing your work that you do every day to the classroom, and they refine it and iterate it with you. And at some point, your curriculum design, you're competent. You've created a curriculum that is adequate. And that's kind of fun because you can do it in the workplace. Now, you might choose to do some blended programs, and these are probably some of the better ones. The UIC program is the gold standard in medical education master's degrees. They have the biggest department of medical education in the country. It's been around a long time. If you're going to do any degree, I would definitely look at UIC as one of them. And you can do almost all online. There's a little bit of in-person that's required. Same thing with Penn. You go for a couple weeks total to Pennsylvania, and everything else is done online. And then the USC is an interesting one. It's a master's in academic medicine, and it teaches you a little bit more about administration. And there's some international programs that are also really highly regarded. The master's program in Utrecht in particular have great alumni bases all around the world, including the United States. So let's say you don't want to do a master's degree. You don't want to do a fellowship. What else is out there? There's a bunch of certificate programs that I would encourage you to consider. So there's the R-Med Ed program run by SAEM, and it's meant to be for folks who already have a little bit of research background. It's an advanced course. So if you don't have that research background, I would recommend doing Merck at Cord first. The Merck program is Medical Education Research Certificate. It's a AAMC product, and it's taught at the AAMC meeting, and it's also taught Cord. You have to complete 6 of 8 modules, and you get your certificate. And then I think you're ready for the R-Med Ed course. The Lem Faculty Incubator is probably my favorite on this list. It's a year-long online program, excellent mentorship. You'll walk out at least with one published paper. It's a very small cohort of folks who are accepted every year. It's very competitive, but they do so that they can give you adequate mentorship throughout the year. The ASIP Teaching Fellowship teaches you how to be a great bedside teacher and give great lectures. And then, if you've not heard of it, the Macy Faculty Scholars Program is based, it's the Macy Foundation, but based at Harvard, the courses. There's several different varieties of them. You go for a week intensive course, and they're really interesting topics, and it's outside of emergency medicine, which I think is an important thing. So that's training. Let's move on to publishing. And when we think about publishing our work, there's a pecking order to just about everything that goes into making a paper. So I'll cover a couple of them. The first is, the type of paper that you're publishing. So, you obviously would like to publish your work in a high-impact journal. There's not a lot of high-impact journals in medical education. Our work is not being published in Science, for instance. So you might have to forego the high-impact factor and consider whether you're going to publish in a specialty journal or a medical education journal. If it's a purely medical education project, I say shoot for the stars and go for the med ed journals. They have very low accept rates, and that makes them rigorous. But I think it's worth your time. If not, there are specialty journals certainly that publish education research all the time. And then obviously, PubMed indexed is a better paper than just a non-PubMed indexed peer review paper, and peer review is better than not peer review. So this is sort of pecking order. And then for authorship, there's a pecking order as well. First and last are the things that matter. Second, maybe at some schools. First is usually the person who writes the manuscript, and they're more junior, and then the senior author on the paper is always the last author. So there's a bunch of great med ed journals out there. The ones that are highlighted in red, I think, are the ones you should add to your RSS feed if you want to become facile with the literature in medical education. And I would argue if you're going to be a medical educator, you should be able to be facile with the literature. I'll let you take your pictures of that slide. At the end, I have a link for all my slides, so you don't actually have to take all these pictures. I'll leave it up there. And then there are specialty journals that publish med ed. I would say the one that is emerging is the best one for emergency medicine's AEM, education and training. You should watch their accept rate is going to start dropping, and their impact factor is going to go up quite a bit. It's really become the standard. And if you want an annotated bibliography, a long list of these journals, I would take this QR code. It's pretty comprehensive. All right, you got it? All right. So there's a pecking order to how you choose your journal as well. So if you are a single site, single institution, single specialty, you should go for either AEM Education and Training or WestGem. If you are informing UME or GME work, the UME papers should go to Academic Medicine, which is an excellent journal. If it's GME, it can go to Academic Medicine or it can go to JGME, which also has a low accept rate. And then if it's purely med ed, I would say shoot for the stars and go for the med ed journals. The things to consider are the things on the bottom of the board: accept rates, publishing fees, things like that. So some tips. So pro tip number one, hire a medical educator if you're a bad writer. If you're just not a great scientific writer, medical editors rather can get your paper published for you, but then you can learn a lot from their suggested track changes and become a better writer. Other ways to become a better writer: edit other people's papers. It's often easier to edit your friend's paper than it is to write a cold paper yourself, and you can learn a lot about what bad writing looks like as you correct it. Review for journals, see what they're publishing. This is an activity that is promotable as well as service, professional service. You gotta write a lot to become a good writer, and I would argue that you have to make a daily habit of writing. At some point, it behooves the researcher to be able to carve time every day at the same time and write a little bit. Maybe just a couple paragraphs of an article, but it's your sacred time. So mine is between like 6 a.m. and 8 a.m. I write every day. And I learned how to write from a couple books that I would recommend. Deep Work by Cal Newport. It's an outstanding book, and it talks about this carving of time. And then there's one called How to Write a Lot, which is a great title. How to Write a Lot by Sylvia is also a really good read. And then the last pro tip, you can host a writing accountability group. If you've not heard what these are, accountability groups means you essentially put out into the ether, you say to your friends, I'm gonna do my results section this week. And they'll tell you what they're gonna do in the meeting. And then the following week, you say whether you did your results section. And just by stating that you're gonna do it, there's a higher likelihood that you will. So you'll do this for writing. You can be accountable for lots of things. All right, so that's publishing. I'd like to close with training. And this is really, or thriving rather, this is really meant for sort of the mid-career people in the room as you're sort of going to associate and full professor. These are some of my tips for thriving in med ed. The first is to build your platform. And what do I mean by platform? Platform is reach. It's the number of people that you can influence. And that could be students, that could be social media folks who read about your work because you disseminate on social media. Publishing in obscure niche journals, no one's ever gonna find your work. You have to take that journal article and you need to get it out on social media by blogging about it. So for every journal article you publish, I argue that you should have a blog post, and that blog post linked to your social media platform of choice, Twitter or Facebook or whatnot. And that's gonna drive a ton of viewers to your work, and it's gonna develop your expertise in your platform very quickly. From that, I think you should triple dip. So you should publish something, you should blog about it, and you should speak about it. And that will drive up a number of promotable activities on your CV. I think you should venture outside of emergency medicine. There's great med ed conferences that are not specialty specific. Two that I would point out are the AMI and ICRE conference. So Association of Medical Educators in Europe is the biggest medical education conference in the world. And then ICRE is the International Conference on Residency Education, always up in Canada. And probably, don't tell the court people, probably better than court. It's a pretty rigorous meeting. We're at SAEM, I can do that, right? All right. I said write every day. You can start to diversify your writing the further along in your career you go. I think op-eds and editorials are ripe for getting your opinion out there, and you deserve to do that. You've developed a platform. You should use your societal platform as an expert in whatever you're an expert in. Write grants. Grant writing is a skill set that you can develop as a junior faculty member, but you start winning the grants as a mid-career faculty member. So this is the time to write grants. And there's a lot of med ed specific grants out there. Open a lab. I opened a lab, a medical education research lab. It's called the PEARL, the Precision Education Assessment Research Lab at Stanford. We train fellows, we train students, and it's the next generation of researchers. And if you don't have rigorous training, how can you be the next leader? So our Ours is an education scholarship fellowship. There's a publication requirement. There's a grant submission requirement to finish the fellowship. So all this is done in my lab. And then the last couple slides, do something important as a senior faculty member. You can define what important is to you, but you should be able to leave a legacy but when you're leaving when you're retiring, when you're leaving your role. So what would that legacy be? I think you should raise the bar on the work being done in medical education. I think we need to be as rigorous as our clinical researcher and basic science researcher colleagues. And that means ensuring quality to your work and teaching rigor. So that's the thriving section, and that's the end of my talk. And my slides are here on a bit.ly, or you can zap the QR code. And thanks very much. I'm happy to entertain questions. Any questions? All right, thanks.